I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Listen today as I talk to Matt Newburg from Fort Meyers, Florida. Matt leads a church in Southwest Florida that's grown from a small group of 30 to over 140. He talks about the things that have led to consistent growth, like focusing on the one thing. He talks about his superpower, or radical transparency and vulnerability. And finally, he talks about surrendering control quicker and allowing God to work in all situations. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. I want to share some good news. A young man just got baptized last weekend. His name was Jackson Guthridge, and he's got a really cool story because we had a campus swap where disciples from the Flagstaff planting came down and helped support our campus ministry over spring break, and it was awesome. Really appreciate it. I mean, we planted that church and then they sent back recruits to help us on our campus. And they're out tabling one day and a young man came up to their table and was interested. And the guys called me that day and said, "Hey, Rob, we found someone who's really seeking." And so I went over, we studied the Bible with him that night, and he was super open. He's been coming to church since that time, and he just got baptized last Saturday. And what was really neat is he said, "Hey, I'd really like to get baptized at Seven Falls here in Tucson." And initially I was hesitant because it's quite a climb to get up there. But he shared his story and he said, when I was really in a very low point in my life, I went on a hike to Seven Falls just to clear my mind. And I went and I ran into these two ladies and they said, "Hey, you should go talk to those girls up ahead of you on the trail." So he said he went up to the Seven Falls and to the pool, and it's really awesome. It's like 7 waterfalls going into pools of water. They're beautiful, deep pools of water. And so he was sitting there reading a self-help book, and then the 2 women came up to him and said, are you reading the Bible?" And he said, "No, of course not." He was embarrassed that they thought of that. And they said, "Well, we do, and we'd like to study the Bible with you." And so they weren't members of our family of churches, but they showed him some scriptures, and he said that was like a turning point for him. That's when he really started to open up to God and to seeking God. And so when he ran into those disciples on campus a few weeks later, he said, "Okay, maybe this is God working." And so he wanted to get baptized in the same place that was a turning point for him in his walk with God. And so those 2 women could have been angels, I don't know, but it was pretty awesome. So we took a hike up, and it was quite a climb. I mean, it's like we started at 8 a.m. We didn't get up there until about 11:30, and we didn't get back till about 2, but it was fantastic to see him baptized. He's a sophomore at the University of Arizona, and now he's in Georgia at the campus training program. So God is working, really inspired. Have an awesome day. The Climb Conference is coming up November 30th through December 3rd, 2023 in Dallas, Texas. I hope you're planning on registering. If you haven't already, really, really, really want to ask you to sign up and go. You're going to get inspired. You're going to get tools for growth. You're going to get encouraged. It'll be amazing. It'll be one of those times where you go, "Man, I'm so glad I signed up. I'm glad I didn't miss it." It's not one of those things that it's going to be good just listening to it online. If you have the option to be there in person, you're going to make friends. You're going to get encouraged. It'll meet a need that you probably don't even realize that's there. So please register today at robskinner.com if you haven't already. I mentioned this before, but I'm looking for a leadership couple to plant the Sahuarita and Green Valley Church in September of 2023. Now, this is a church planting of these 2 neighboring towns. They adjoin each other in southeastern Arizona, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful area that's super fast growing. And I shared before but there's been a couple driving all the way up from Green Valley, and nearly every Sunday, they're just so touched by the lessons. They're so hungry for the Word of God. They just thank me for preaching the Word to them. They got baptized just a few weeks ago. And when I see the passion and desire of their face, I'm reminded of the man of Macedonia from Acts chapter 16, when he said to Paul, come over and help us. And I feel like that's the Spirit telling me, hey, come over and help us, get something going here. We need a church for them and people like them. That's why I'm looking for a leadership couple to plant this beautiful area of Arizona. If you're interested in leading or going, please email me at rob@robskinner.com. Or maybe you're not interested, but you know of someone who'd be perfect for this. And this is where you've really helped me in the past, is referring me to somebody else or saying, hey, Rob, you got to talk to this couple. And I really appreciate I get emails or texts from people, hey, you need to talk to this person, or you talk to them directly. Please help me out here, because this is an amazing opportunity for somebody. And please help me if you know of somebody who's a good leader. And the podcast really helped me to find Brian and Abby Mackey, who led my last planting 2 years ago to Flagstaff, Arizona. So if you can't go, if you'd like to support the planting with a gift, click the link in the bottom of the show notes and select the general fund option. Matt, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, we haven't met personally, but it's great to meet you and get to know you a little bit. One of the things that really struck me is that you were a self-supporting minister. You were working a secular career. Then you kind of got into the ministry, and I look forward to talking about that and how you've grown your church. So why don't we start off with this question? How did you become a Christian?
June 11th, 1992 is my born-on date. But I came from agnostic, atheist, Jewish background, and really had no respect or only bad or negative feelings towards religiosity. I thought it was kind of a joke for weak people, So if you're in a third world country and you're struggling with, putting food on the table, at least you had Jesus. And that's kind of how I lived my life up until I was about 22 years old. Before that, I had a business in New York City, actually in the Queens Center Mall in New York. I was a part of the big cell phone boom and ran my life into the ground, came back to South Florida, where I was raised, to Hollywood, Florida, just south of Fort Lauderdale area. And I had done this full loop of completely smashing my life to bits and pieces, coming back to looking at the same ceiling that I left when I was 17 years old, and asked myself, what just happened? So my sister was a part of the church, and she'd been probably the only one that stayed in touch with me while I was in New York City for about 3 years. And she invited me to this concert, and it was put on by, the International Churches of Christ over in Fort Lauderdale, called Colorblind, and just was really moved. I needed something good. And unbeknownst to me, she stood me right next to the lead evangelist there, and a guy by the name of John Porter, and he invited me to church, and somehow I got to church the next day, and I remember he preached on Galatians 5:19.
Oh boy!
And it was the first time I actually even considered that this old book, this ancient book, was real. And I thought, he just read a list of my to-dos, and if this book is real, I'm in big trouble. So kind of funny spin on that. He goes at the end of the sermon, and I don't know if you remember the days when we used to do this all the time from the pulpit. If you brought someone with you, challenge them to study the Bible today. And so he said that, but I was emotional, and I had tears in my eyes, shaking, lips quivering, and I kind of misunderstood what he said. So I said to the guy next to me, a guy by the name of Ron Lennox, I said, hey, I challenge you to study the Bible with me today. He goes, okay. And, it was a rocky road, because I had no faith. When you told me to turn my Bible to Matthew, I was going to the beginning, in Genesis. I had no idea what the Bible was about. So I kind of started my journey, and my sister was there. So that helped me a lot too, to believe that this stuff was real. It took me months of studying the Bible and considering that this was in fact truth, because I would go back and forth. And I'm sure, if any of you guys out there, and I'm sure you too, Rob, studied the Bible with an atheist, it always goes back to, oh, wait a second, is this real?
Right.
As far as you go down in faith, you still kind of come back to that science versus God. And, but they were great. They really helped me to prove the scriptures using science. And they did a great job. So anyway, so June 11th, 1992 became a disciple over in Fort Lauderdale area.
Okay. And how old were you at the time?
22 years old.
Okay. So you went to college, were just graduating, didn't go to college?
I started college. It wasn't for me. I didn't see enough money in it, in a degree. So I was friends with a lot of affluent guys that had, really affluent parents,
Right.
in that area. And one of a really good friend of mine, his dad was a billionaire, and he said, "Hey, we want to open this store over in Hollywood. Let's work together and sell cell phones and pagers." And so I quit school and I did that. And within the first year, turning 18 years old, I already had, pretty big bank account, living on the beach. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, my dad's best friend owns the Queens Center Mall. Let's go half and half. You open the store up there. I'll be down here. I'll be your distributor in Hollywood. You build the mall, the store out there. And if you need any help, I'll go up there and help you out." He was only a few years older than I was.
Oh my gosh.
And I just dropped everything and went up there and took a chance.
So there's a strong entrepreneurial bent to you. You've got that in your blood.
Yeah, I've not actually worked for anyone before. Actually, working for the church was the first paycheck that I'd ever received. Before that, it was, just making money. And I think I've worked scrubbing clubs at a golf course to get free golf for a while. But other than that, I mean, I really never really worked for anyone else.
I see. Okay. So Hollywood, Florida to New York, and then you came back to Hollywood.
Right.
Okay. How'd you meet your wife?
Blind date. And she's still blind. So it costs a lot of money to the optometrist to keep her that way. But she was, my sister had moved to Tallahassee, Florida, which is the northern part of Florida. And I was just up there on a big, huge group date that she was, that her and some friends were putting on. And I met Deanna and we went for a walk. And after that time we had spent together, I felt like she was a person I was going to have in my life somehow.
Wow.
For the rest of my life. Like we became best friends within maybe 3 hours. So, again, back in those days, you didn't have texting, you had beepers and
right.
Cell phones were like 30 cents a minute. So you didn't do a lot of that, but I emailed my quiet times to her and she responded. And it was kind of neat because really for the first time in my life, this was a girl in my life that was helping me spiritually without having to rebuke me for doing something stupid. You know what I mean? So like, I felt like this person could really change me. I felt like I needed her in my life. So, we just developed that really good friendship. So we had a long distance relationship for about 9-10 months. And then she decided to move down I was actually in Palm Beach. It was a little bit further north of where I started as a Christian. And, rest is history. Got married there, and I don't want to go too far ahead of your questions, but got married there. And then we moved over to the West Coast to support an evangelist and women's ministry leader that was kind of salvaged before a big change in our movement. So,
okay. Yeah. So would you mind giving me an overview of your career up until now?
Career meaning ministry?
Well, just what have you done since, let's say the time you got baptized? Like what have
Sure.
You were working there selling cell phones and in that business. Okay. So what have you done since that time? You got married in what year? You got baptized in 92. You got married. Okay. So you got married nine years later.
Right.
Okay. So you're close to 30 at that point. All right. So what'd you do since give me just the bird's eye view of your career from your baptism up until now?
Yeah. So that type of business, cell phones and pagers, took a big turn, and it became very heavily unregulated. So if you were going to make it in that industry, you almost had to kind of buy and sell stolen equipment. I mean, it was just the only way to do it. And it was a short amount of time, but that was the big change that was going on. And it was going from analog, which was, just regular analog, how many people could fit on a site, to digital, which digital changed the whole industry and it got regulated. But before then, it was hard to be in that business and be honest. So I just jumped out and thought, I don't know what I'm good at. And a brother took me under his wing and taught me the Macintosh business, because he was like a Macintosh consultant. And I used to sell Apple computers out of my store. So I had some knowledge. And I became a small business consultant. Really, I would go into businesses and help them to get applications, mostly computer software, that would help them to run their business and get them out of the office and into making money, so to help them making money. So I did that for years, and it was great. It was a lot of fun and really enjoyed that up until really made some changes moving here from the West Coast. So I probably did that for 9 years, but I was also in the ministry prior to as a singles minister. And that's a whole nother story. About 6 months after I became a Christian, I was put on staff in South Florida, and I just couldn't handle the politics of it. It was just not, and my character was not where it needed to be honest, and have integrity in a room of high powered ministers.
Right.
So, yeah, that lasted for about a year and a half, about 3 years. I was on staff for about 3 years between the Miami church and the Broward church, which is, two larger congregations, primarily working with singles, some youth. But, I had developed almost a personality disorder because I learned how to be this minister guy at the same time living kind of a dark life that wasn't open and super afraid and not transparent or vulnerable. So I was fired from staff about 3 years later. Was dating at the time, so I lost my girlfriend, lost my job. Kind of sounds like a country song. Kick the dog, whatever. I was moved out of that area to Palm Beach because they felt that it wouldn't be healthy for me to stay in the same ministry as I was leading.
Right.
And so I moved to Palm Beach, and that's kind of I found God then. I don't think I knew God up until I needed him. And I think when I was taken off staff, I had to make almost the same decisions that I made when I first became a disciple.
Mm-hmm.
What am I here for?
Right.
Am I really here for God, or am I here for that, adoration or friends? Yeah, it was good. I was kind of a rediscovery of my relationship with God. And I made a lot of decisions at that time. One, which, one of your questions asked before, was that, my scripture, my base, my foundation became 1 John 1:5, just living in the light, sees in the light, have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus purifies us from all unrighteousness. And I felt that if I could just live out that scripture, I'll get to heaven. And so here we are, I'm years past that, and you'll probably hear that in maybe 1 out of every 4 sermons that I preach. So I still believe that same thing.
Such a great passage. It's interesting you talk about kind of going through like another born again process. I went through the same thing as a younger Christian. I was 2 years old as a Christian. I just had gotten into the ministry, had a great beginning, lots of baptisms, but then I just kind of lost sight of why I was doing it. I'm like, okay, so is the goal just, to break my record from last semester and baptize 2 more people, and I just lost track of why I was doing it, was very focused on performance rather than Jesus. And I went through a real tough time, almost walked away, where, I think people felt sorry for me. I was so miserable. And luckily I hung in there, by fingernails, but it's weird when you're saying that. I'm like, I think God does that on purpose with certain people, just to refine them, because I needed it. I mean, I came back with a new appreciation for the grace of God, for Jesus. And, my motivation got totally refined. Absolutely.
I agree. And it's happened a few times to me since.
Yeah.
So I feel like I meet God again about every 5 years, I think. Yeah, so it's kind of sick. My life seems to be cyclical with that. Like
right.
My faith be tested and refined so that I can find him again and prove that he's real, and that's another discovery for me, is if you boil it all down, when you say the word faith, it just means do you believe that God exists or not? It all comes down to that again for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is God real? And if he's real, then this book works. The rest of it follows. If you don't believe he's real, then you really have a lot of hangups with what he has to say or things that happen in your life. So,
right. Okay. So mid 90s, you got fired from that. You went back to work, and just where have you been since then?
Yeah. So I became a small business consultant. About a year into marriage, we were leading a pretty large teen ministry in the Palm Beach area of South Florida. And basically, back then, you were leading the teens, but you were also taking care of their parents and everything else that was going on. And we hit a lot of walls with the teen ministry. We had a different philosophy. We wanted the parents completely involved, and we had this dream of like having this teen ministry that was teen worker. You had teen workers, but it was fed by the parents. And, we pitched this idea that if we could just get the parents to disciple the teen workers, they would have this motivation that would blow the ministry out of the water,
right?
Because they would want to make sure these guys are doing well, with their kids. So we, over time, and what we found was that we were really the ones that were in the way of the ministry, the teen workers, the teen leaders, because the parents would dump them into our ministry and hope that they became Christians, after they spent 14 years with them, raising them,
right,
and giving them full heart and attention. And now they give them to all of us knuckleheads that are, come from dysfunctional families and have no idea what it means to be a kingdom kid. So we felt like something was broken. So we got with the elders there, on a trip and pitched this idea. And he's like, yeah, you guys are the problem. So it wasn't months later where he asked us to move to the West Coast. He gave the ministry to the parents. And we moved to the west coast of Florida, which is about a 2-hour drive across the gut of Florida, to support a couple that was leading a church that didn't really, it was hard for them to appreciate. And it was just, they were having a tough time. And I had studied the Bible with their son. So that was the connection that we had with them.
Got it.
So we went over, and it was a ministry, probably like 30. And probably shouldn't have paid staff on at the time, but that's kind of what we were doing at the time. Maybe oversight was being given by another church at the time as well. So, our churches had not become autonomous yet. So there was someone that was responsible, to making sure that this church did well. But the couple was going through a hard time. So we just became their fans and taking care of the one teen that was in the ministry. We came from a teen ministry of like 40
right.
to one teen, and the parents were the lead evangelists and one was ministry leader. So we went like bowling, we found other things to do, and we'd only been married for about a year. So it was good for us too, because we were running pretty hard as newlyweds. And I became a realtor. I used the skills I had acquired as being a small business consultant, and got into real estate and did mostly investment real estate. I didn't really deal with the end user type product. I wasn't like a sales guy that was on the road looking, showing houses. I was really interested in the investment side, where guys were buying multiple properties, and they were more businessmen than they were, homeowners.
Right.
And I did that for years, opened up a property management company underneath that. And that did really well. But the couple, this is kind of where things turn. And I guess I can give you the intro of me becoming a minister, if that's okay. The couple that we moved over for, about 4 years later, their son stayed healthy, and we kind of built a somewhat of a teen ministry. The church got to about 45 or so. And they kind of moved on, went to a different church because their son was graduated and he went to college, so they really didn't have a reason to be in Southwest Florida. And they were still kind of not as appreciated as they really should have been by the congregation. So they stepped out, and we got a group together and just kind of had a talk. And we felt like, it'd be good just like not have paid staff right now. We've got guys that could do a lesson. I said, I can. And I didn't say this, but they were saying, hey, you have some ministry experience. Why don't you preach on Sunday? You guys do the finances. You're the pastor,
right.
Oversight, eldership couple. And we just played church. And it was a blast. We had a really great time. So I was working 60 hours a week with real estate and preaching on Sunday. So if someone complained about the message, I'd say, hey, you got it next week. I mean, it was just a different type of freedom. And we had a blast. We really did. It was a lot of fun. And we took the pressure from one person that was the quote unquote leader and spread it through the church. So where there was a buy-in for everyone, because everyone was, I mean, there might've been like natural leadership, and of course that develops, but at the same time, there was no one to point at anymore. So, took the excuses out of the room, to kind of put it mildly, we had to all kind of learn to stand on our own 2 feet spiritually.
Right.
And I think it was really good for our church, but yeah. So we did that for some time actually. And it was great. We had a lot of fun, and I was going to the retreats, our leadership retreats. And this was post change of our movement. We were trying to get our feet underneath us as a movement, and we were autonomous. So we had some savings down here in Southwest Florida. We no longer had oversight from a larger church. So a lot of us were experiencing these new things. So I was going to these leadership retreats with a lot of my heroes in the faith, watching them stand up with their Bibles in these full-on arguments, about doctrine and how churches should be run. It was like the birth of something new
right
here in Florida. And I remember times just, being on our faces, with these leaders and guys that I really looked up to, really hearing their hearts for the first time. And I think that was when I really considered that maybe it's not so impossible for me to consider leading a church again. I think my first experience was just such a debacle and so foreign for me to actually have character. But I realized none of us have character. You know what I mean? Like none of us really know what we're doing. Right. And the best of us are a mess. And I learned a lot through those times. And a lot of those guys ended up becoming my best friends. And in that room, and the same guy that put me on staff the first time really told me to consider, going into the full-time ministry again and leading that church that I'm in. And but it was confusing because we were making pretty good income, and I wasn't sure if that was the path. So I came home and talked to my wife about it. She's an engineer, and she loves her job. She still does work full-time in a secular job, so we've kept that model going. And I asked her, what do you think? And she said, let's pray about it. So we prayed about it for about a year, fasted, got advice. And finally, about a year after just really thinking and pray about it, I sold off my portion of the company and jumped in, and first time I ever started, having a fixed income. We downsized. Right. We were starting to have babies too. So that was a big thing as well. This is really great for small church leaders. So kind of shift just for a second, is that what it's like you get it to a saturation point to where you're working 40, 50 hours in a secular job, but your church is growing. And that's awesome and great. But it's not a bunch of new Christians. You have, people trying to raise their children. There are marriage problems. There are special needs. There's divorce care. There's, drug addiction. There's, everything under the sun. And if we don't have someone that wakes up in the morning thinking about that, the church suffers. And that's what I saw. I thought we have to hire someone, and I need to get out of the way, or I need to just go all in. But I can't do this anymore. And my wife, even her, she's like, look, you got to choose a lane. You're never home. Kids are going to start screaming, stranger danger when you walk through the door, right, if you're not careful. So that was the catalyst, actually, is really considering what's best for the church, not necessarily what's best for us. And I think it took prayer to take us, put us to the side and really look to see what God's will is here and what will be best for the congregation. And everyone trusted us because we were kind of growing up together. It was very blue collary, It wasn't someone hired in from outside. And there was a lot of damage in the church at that time too. So it really, I think it lent itself to that move.
What year? What year was that? And where specifically were you located?
We're in Southwest Florida. We're still here. So we've been here for 20 years.
Can you name some towns or cities that would be nearby?
Fort Meyers, where Hurricane Ian, Fort Myers area. I think you referenced the video on a text, but yeah, Fort Myers, Naples, between the two counties, which is Collier and Lee County, we're about 1.5 million. So it's not a small area, but it has been one of the top growing areas for the last 10 years in the US. So it is, since we've moved here, it is, it is definitely morphed into a different culture here. I mean, there's every color, background, language here now. It had this kind of undercurrent of Midwestern feel when we first got here. It was nothing like the East Coast, Southeast coast of Florida. But now it's very multicultural. It actually fits a lot of our goals and dreams as, in our International Churches of Christ model, so anyway.
So what year was that you decided to go full-time as a professional minister?
That would be 2009. Yeah.
2009. Okay. And you've done that since, you've been in the same place, and you've done that since that time.
Yeah, we've been here for 20 years, and I've been since 2009. So that was 8 years after we moved here is when I did that, when I took the job full-time with the church. And we had to be creative. Congregation of 50 taking on a salary. So my wife works full-time. She handled all the benefits. And it was kind of the equivalent of the church giving me a bag of cash under the table, because they didn't have to worry about any of the benefits, healthcare, any of that. That was all taken care of by my wife's job. So it lent, again, we had like a little neat snippet. It's like we sat down, we made the decision. I said, my goal is for the church, not for me. I said, I'm a self-sufficient guy. If I need to go back out there and beat the streets and make money, I'll do it again. It's no big deal. But let's put together a 3-year plan that we have 3 years of savings to give me that bag of money. And of course we're working with the giving of the church, to put that little equation together. And if nothing changed from now till then, but my goal is that we'll never look back and not be able to hire someone. Let's get the church to where it's stable enough to hire someone to take this job, and that was my dream. And so the plan was really to step out in 3 years. And let's see what happens, and get a seasoned trained guy in, you know what I mean? So, and that's kind of how I felt. I'm like, look, I'm a hired hand. I'm like, I'm like the, just kind of the pinch hitter, I'm going to do a great job. I'm going to try to get you a home run and get some scoring. But at the end of the day, I know that I'm not a guy that, is ministry, trained Boston or, some of these bigger programs. And that's kind of how I started. So ironically, 3 years later, we're out of a elementary school cafetorium. We've grown to about 70-ish, 75, and our finances were never better than ever before. So now we're going into a full-time location, which is kind of a strip mall that we just basically cleared out 4 units and took them all. And we made Kingdom Kids area and we, sanctuary and everything. If you walk in, it just looks just like a church. I mean, you're in my office right now. So I've got a full-time office and,
wow.
And there we are 5 years later. The church is continuing to grow and people are looking at me like, yeah, that this is your job, right? Like there's no, this is what you're supposed to be doing with your life. But it was kind of neat how it happened. And I think that's how it had to happen for me, because the politics and all of that other stuff, it was the antithesis of what I wanted. Like everything about ministry, quote unquote ministry, was nauseating to me. I hated the whole idea because of my first experience. I mean, really, it had nothing to do with the ministry. It was just all of who I became in the ministry.
Right.
So I had this fear, and I still have it. I think I still react, probably overreact to some of the large church atmosphere, and my PTSD starts to kick in, and I start acting weird and thinking that I've got to be someone that I'm not, all the temptations
right.
are right outside my door. So there's a lot of benefits to being in a small church too. You can create your own culture, and that's something that we enjoy doing.
Well, the church has grown. I mean, it's amazing. So you went there when it was like 30, you mentioned.
Right.
Now it's 140. You took it over in 2009. How'd you do it? What's helped it to grow?
Okay, so that's a really good question, and I don't think that there's not one answer to that, but I think that there's something that if I were to distill something down to when our church had its greatest growth, it would be a personal experience that I went through. And I think I was kind of explaining this to you on the phone. So I'll shorten it so I can get to the point. And I never did get to the point when we were on our conversation. I hit a wall spiritually, realized that I was living vicariously through all of the activity as opposed to have my own relationship with God. There I go again, right? That was the thing that happened the first time. And I just went on a long prayer walk, made a decision on that and that time with God that I would never do that again. That my time with God is intimacy, and that I'm never going to use our intimacy publicly. And that's my time with God. That's my connection, and it's between me and God. And so we could have a sermon series and all that. Now I could use golden nuggets that I find within my quiet times. Don't get me wrong, but that won't be my motivation to have a quiet time ever again. Because I realize, again, my character, whatever that might be, is not, it's too low and lying fruit. I'm a
Right.
sales guy. I
Right.
want the quick way, the quick fix. Let's
Right.
move on. So, I mean, I'm all the way to this day. I have my own private series, my own quiet times that I do. It has nothing to do with, what we're doing as a church. And sometimes there's overlap, but most of the time, we're kind of moving in this direction. I've got my private time. Anyway, through that, I discovered something, and one of our elder type guys, he's actually from the Chicago area. He is a retired Starbucks manager, and there was a time in Starbucks that they were making this big change, and they said, look, we need to choose a lane. Like, all the coffee companies are suffering out there. They were suffering. They were spread too thin or whatever. So the CEO gets this whiteboard out, and I'm probably messing up his story, but he gets this whiteboard out. He says, what are some of the things that we deal with on a regular basis? What are our goals? What are our dreams? And man, it was everything under the sun: customer satisfaction, even all the way down to store hours and style of restaurant, where they should plant these restaurants, this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
What kind of foods they should have. They wanted to be like some people want to be Panera Bread, or whatever. And so they couldn't decide. And he says, we need to have one thing that we concentrate on that's going to take care of all these other problems that we have. And they ended up choosing, and it's the philosophy, it's not the specifics here with my illustration here, but they ended up choosing employee satisfaction, which was like, what? But when you walk into a Starbucks today, you see it. You see how they protect their employees. They dress how they want. And most of these employees are there even when they're off. Like it's their home. But if there's a dispute between a customer and an employee, they'll choose the employee's side, even to this day, because they know that if the employees are happy, then they're going to treat the customers right. Like they chose that one thing. So I'm explaining what I'm going through with Sam, and he just holds his finger up like this. He goes, it's just one thing. And we turned over to Matthew 12, verse 30. And I looked, and I wanted to find out, what would Jesus do? And this is right after the Jesus is giving this great answer, right? And the Pharisees get together and we hear this conversation with the Sadducees, right? And they get this their best of the best to ask one question to Jesus. Let's trick him once and for all. And they ask him, which is the greatest commandment? And he's not talking about the 10, they're talking about the mitzvot, right? The 630 some odd commands that they had developed post 10 commandments.
Right.
That they were heaving on each other. And Jesus was so clever there. And this is what I imagine in my mind, that he just held up one finger and he goes, it's just one thing: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And of course, he gives them that stomach shot, and love your neighbor as yourself, And that's what we did as a church. I said, if I were to distill everything down to what we need to do, we're going to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that's it. And we're going to see what he does. Within a year, and when I say a year, I developed a series around this. I mean, it's all documented, which is really cool, because I didn't no idea what God was going to do. I'm like, we're going to let go of everything. All of our processes, all of our ideas, all of the vision, we're going to distill it down to one thing: Kingdom Kids, whatever it might be. if it's not loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, doesn't fit underneath that, we're getting rid of it. And I think I read this book, The Simple Church, and kind of dabbled with it, and it kind of gave me some ideas. And within about an 18-month period, I'll be fair, I baptized my father. Never said the word evangelism from the pulpit. And we had more people out to church than we knew what to do with. Like, we had more studies going on than we knew what to do with. So I had to go through the study series for the church, because half the church we didn't even know how to study the Bible with people. But they were just concentrating on God, and their job was changing. Their neighbors were seeing the difference. Their marriages were flourishing. I'll give you a quick example of what we taught with our family group leaders during this time. My wife and I became like, quote unquote, experts. And then we weren't in any way, shape, or form. We were looked at as experts. So all the problems came to us. And that's another small church setup, that they think that the guy needs to know everything about finances, marriage, counseling, aging parents. I mean, you name it, they go to you for it. And what I realized is, like, even just, I'll give you one example with a marriage, say that you and your wife are having a dispute. We said, we're not doing this anymore. We're not fit, because we're not family counselors. Like, and on top of that, family counselors get it wrong a lot. Like, how? So we figured something out, and it was organic. We're trying to do something supernatural, and you can't do that without the supernatural. Duh, right? So if a couple comes to us and say, hey, we're fighting, she's doing this, he's doing this, he's being a jerk. Well, she never respects me. He doesn't love me. Where's the cards when we first got married? Like, for this, that, and other thing. And we've all been in those situations. You're just like, where do we start? My wife and I said, you know what? We're going to do one thing. We're going to ask them, how are your quiet times going? And of course, it's deafening, because if you're fighting, most likely you're drifting away from God. And then we'd ask, are you praying together? So here's our challenge. Pray together every day. Have a quiet time on your own every day. And then let's get back together in a week. Two things would happen, Rob. One, we would get back together in a week, and they'd go, oh, it's so funny, I forgot we were fighting. Like, because we would bring it up, say, hey, so how's that dispute going? They're like, oh, the fight. Yeah. No. We're way past that. But look what I'm finding in the scriptures. And we've been praying every day. And now we're thinking about her mom, moving her mom. And like, all these miraculous decisions get made in prayer, and they're bonded. Or the other would happen a lot as well, pretty frequently, is that you'd find that they don't know how to pray. They haven't been praying. No one really taught them how to pray. So they're like, I close my eyes, and we just say the same prayer over and over again, and we're just not connecting with God. Or I don't know what to read. Every page in the Bible feels like 100 pounds. Like, these are just things that I would hear.
Right.
But I can help them with that. Like, my wife and I were like, now that we can help you with. Like, so all right, bro, you call me in the mornings, I'll pray with you. Have you ever put a prayer list together? Let's do one right now, or, hey, look at my library. I've got hundreds of books that are getting dust on them because I can't get to them, or I read them before. Choose one that fires you up, and read it every day, and have a quiet time every day. Let's get used to having quiet times. I mean, I could teach you how to have a quiet time. I could show you how to pray, but I can't fix your marriage. I can't be there all the time. And so that worked it became kind of a part of our DNA. Purity. Brother would come to me and say, bro, I just can't overcome this. And I'm looking at that. I'm looking at this. Instead of me going, hey, let's put this special program on your phone, so every time you go into a website, it'll notify or whatever. Right. Nothing against those things. They're helpful. They're tools, resources. But we wanted to get to the root. Like, bro, how's your walk with God going? What are you reading? How often are you praying? Are you praying with the bros in your household? Okay, here's your challenge. This week, you pray every day with the bros. You know what I mean? And every day you have a quiet time. And at the end of the week, I want you to tell me, like, do a paper on your quiet time.
Right.
You read that paper to me. Well, at the end of the week, what we would have, one of the two. One, bro, I've never done better on my purity. I cannot believe, or I don't know how to have a quiet time, bro. I've realized I just don't know how to connect with God. But I can't be there when he comes home at 11 o'clock.
Right.
And he wants to go through the reel on his phone. I mean, I just can't, we can't manage that stuff. So we actually freed up our family group leaders to assist people to get to God. So what happened in that time is we got our eyes off of trying to fix everything, and we're all weighed down with all the negatives and the problems. And we finally are free to like, all right, I'm hunting after God now. And it was so attractive. The singing was amazing. We never sang like that before. The reach out was amazing. And I never said the word evangelism. I never did a lesson on, hey, you need to reach out to your neighbors. It was never about that. It was looking at like character studies of David. We went through the whole book of Judges, because it was a great picture of what you look like with God, what you look like without God, and
Right.
over human nature. And God, within that time, going back to Sam was a snowbird for a while, and not a pure snowbird, but like 3 months up in Illinois and the rest down here. He was on his snowbird time up there. And I called him up and I said, Sam, I don't know if you've realized, but we've added almost 50% to our church in 18 months. And he just began to weep because we knew what we had gone through. Like we were there, mulling over the one thing. And we just made the decision to get out of the way and just let God do his thing. So anyway, I mean, I hope that helps.
Now let me ask you this question. If there's one thing that sets you apart from other leaders, a superpower, what do you think that would be? What is it you feel like you're bringing to the table that's different?
Yeah, that's easy for me. It's transparency and vulnerability. So I'm that guy in Florida. So if there's a message that needs to be done that has to do with confession of sin, or, let's get out of our own way, boasting in our weaknesses, that's what I've learned. Okay. That's my secret sauce.
Okay.
So
that's delighting in your weaknesses.
Yeah, but I don't think you could fake that. So I think there's another part of that I'll give you. Well, I've had interns and I've tried to pass that on, but what happens, like, just an example, when I preach, I try to take some words out of my vocabulary. One is you. So I take the word you out of my vocabulary. It's either us or me. And but that's organic because I really feel that way because I'm being open and I'm, busting open my heart and I'm being vulnerable and I feel embarrassed, or whatever. And you know how that feels when you confess sin publicly or you talk about, something that's really going on deep down inside. And it puts me in a position that, how can I accuse or tell someone to do something? It's us, you know what I mean? Or at best it's us, but it's really me. So it's hard to put that on. But at the same time, I think there is an exercise in it because we did have one intern that changed from really being a you guy to a me guy, which was that practice of consistent openness,
mm-hmm.
And vulnerability. And I think that is a quality of a leader that needs to stand out,
absolutely.
Is that we're willing to face the demons, and lead in that direction. But so it's what I do well. We had a conference, and your time's probably chunking away now, but I was a part of the single service team, which is a national team that oversees the singles, and now it's international, which is awesome. And Wade Cook was a part of that at the time, and Bill Molden, who's one of the teachers in our movement, Marshall Mead, who led the conference, the World Conference, oversaw the conference. So a lot of guys that were willing to just kind of do the heavy lifting jumped in. And I think I just wasn't paying attention when someone asked if someone can do it, and everyone else stepped back, and I was, oh, wait, but I did, they asked me to do the main keynote for the men. And I'm like, dude, you got all these, Larry Reed.
Right.
I mean, these guys are galactic speakers. I just sit at their feet and learn. Like, I love these guys, and they're church leaders and they do amazing work. And I didn't understand, at the time. So I did this message, and the message actually was on the one thing, ironically. And I've got a couple different ways to express that. And I get up, and there's the room is probably 450, 500 men, single guys. I stand up. Here I am. I'm 5'7" on a good day, balding. You know what I mean? And I'm like feeling insecure and like, why am I up here? What am I doing? All these dudes, man. I feel like the least of them. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to use my superpower. So I had him close the back doors, and I had been struggling with some thoughts. My wife wasn't there, and all these really pretty single girls walking around. And I had some of these things rolling around in my head. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go there, man. So I got up and I just confessed sin for the first 7 to 10 minutes. And I talked about my struggles. I talked about, man, last night I was really tempted to look at stuff on the internet. I hadn't been tempted like that in like months. And I'm like, I almost failed last night. I think the only reason I didn't, I was just telling it, was because of you guys, like I knew I had this message, and I had to stop myself. And I wish I was noble enough to call my wife and pray together, but I wasn't. I was like the sleazy, and I just confessed, and I did this message. And when I got done with the message itself that I had actually planned to speak on, I felt like that was probably one of the better messages I've ever preached. Mm. There was a line of guys all the way to the back of the auditorium. And I'm like, and that doesn't happen in a small church.
Right.
Right.
So
I'm not really used to that. You know what they all wanted to talk about? My first 7 minutes. Mm. I don't even know if they heard my message. They just cared that I had the courage to confess my sin. And wow. They're confessing sin, and we're crying together, and we're praying together. So I think those are some of the moments that I've had. Like, it really, it is something that you asked if I had a superpower.
Right.
I think God, through, it's organically learned. I mean, it wasn't like something that I put on. Maybe it's more like Superman. I take the disguise off.
Right. That's rare. Matt, what advice would you give to self-supporting ministers, people that are in smaller churches and they're just struggling to make ends meet, and they want to see great things happen, but it's frustrating, it's challenging. Coming out of COVID, it's even more challenging.
Yes. Yeah. And we had some challenges too coming out of COVID as well. I think some of the small churches, well, maybe all of us, we're not considered the small church anymore. It's kind of funny. Like, I don't even get invited a lot of times to the 100 or under stuff, which, amen. We still run it that way. But I think taking advantage of the freedom, like if there's an unpaid ministry, there's a freedom there that I think there's like a glory in being an unpaid example that a paid guy doesn't have in his pocket that he could pull out. And I think it's a short amount of time. If you're going to grow, you can't do that indefinitely. You do eventually need someone that's going to wake up in the morning thinking about the church full time. But there's a time that we can take advantage of that position, that we can go to the leadership meetings. And let me tell you something, you walk in as an unpaid guy and you show up to those retreats, all of those paid guys go, whoa, because he's working 50 hours. You're in the same amount of Bible studies, or maybe more Bible studies, because you're not having to do as much organization. And you show up those meetings and it's like, it's glorious, and and you can say whatever you want. What are you gonna do? Fire me? You know what I mean? Like, so there's this freedom that comes with an unpaid lay leadership position, but it also removes the excuses from the congregation. Once you get paid, and I remember someone telling me this right before I took the job here. Actually, the guy who counted the cost with me, he said, it's all going to change. When you take the job, it's all going to change. I mean, you can really work hard for it not to, but it's just a fact, that you're the one, you get paid to do this. And it does, and it changes. And I've had to grow into that position, to have a clear conscience, not think that I've got to work 150 hours a week, because they're paying me. And how can I stand in front of this congregation that's giving their contribution and me not take out the garbage or put the chairs out or something? So, but when you're not, you really can call others. So I think part two of this, right, is I was able, and I felt this freedom. I could demand discipleship from, or discipling oversight from neighboring church full-time staff, because you're doing the hard work, you're not getting paid. And I think there's a freedom to go, hey, I need help. we need elders to come over here and help me with the situation, period. Like, I don't care if they're busy,
Right. Right.
because there's this freedom that you have, like, hey, we need help. Or other evangelists to come in and guest speak. I never had so many evangelists guest speak until once I took the job, it was like, it was over, but I had all these guys coming in, flying in on their own dime, because they knew that we, like, we're a smaller church, and let the bigger church pay for it. It's all good. We got it all, bro. We don't want anything from you guys. We just want to come and serve. Kingdom Kids training. We demanded it. We need your Kingdom Kids coordinators to come over here and train us. We need help, administration, etc. All of these kind of parts, shepherding. So I think there's a time, and hopefully it's not for super long, like you do become a church that is a little bit more self-sustained. But I think that there's a time where you don't have the funds to pay. And we took our time too. So we didn't rush into hiring someone, and I'm glad we didn't, obviously, but we felt like it needed to be the right fit for us. There's no silver bullet. And I think I see smaller churches think that if they just hire this guy or this couple, it's going to fix everything. And it doesn't. It really doesn't. I think there's something to a smaller congregation having to work through this stuff together that builds that character and integrity. And they're really your future they're your future shepherds. They're your future elders, because they stuck it out and they remember the days, so you're building your story together. So anyway, I hope that answered your question, but
no, that's great. What's working coming out of COVID? Like, people were in disarray. I mean, it's lots of isolation. What have you done to strengthen people over the last, let's say, 6 months or so, to get them back on their feet after the pandemic?
Yeah, that's good. Just like everyone else, we celebrated the first time we came back, and then we had a second wave, but we did online service. We did the best that we could. I think the first time I did a sermon, I don't know if you remember, it was probably mid-March, right? March 14, 15, 16,
right.
Like that weekend. And everyone shut everything down. We thought it was the apocalypse. Like, it was
Right.
everything's over.
Right.
We're all going to die. So let's do the sayonara sermon. I don't know. But I remember setting my iPhone up with Facebook Live and going live, and it was looking up my nostrils, as I preached. Which a lot of us weren't doing that. And all the churches that were doing it were like, aha, see, I knew it. You'd need us, sooner or later. So we were doing just like everyone else, Sundays, we were doing online services, and we grew into that, which was great. It's a big part of our ministry now, which is great. But coming out of COVID, I think a benefit to being a small church, and since that's what we're talking about here, it's a different meeting than when we get together with our other Florida leadership. I think the benefit of a small church is that the big church and the small church, they both have their purpose. The big church, it's awesome. This is where all the big activity happens. The mission teams get planted out, the training centers, and the books are written within the larger churches. I mean, the teachers are there, the head elders and these guys, the evangelists that are leading these evangelist teams. I mean, I every day I thank God for those guys that are willing to sit in these meetings and argue gender roles. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm like,
right.
This is awesome. The small church is not built for that, but the small church has a capability to turn on a dime. And that's what I love about the small church. A large church is like an aircraft carrier. It takes miles to turn around, because you have all these small groups and all these systems that all have to make a turn. You've got teachers committee and eldership committees and all that, and they all have to get on the same page before they start turning that wheel. A small church is like, look, we're going to have a meeting on Zoom tonight. Hopefully you can show up. Most of the church shows up. You make a decision that night and you turn and you make a turn. So after COVID, some of the things that we did was like, look, we got to get back together. It's not many of us. You know what I mean? It's not like we're turning an aircraft carrier. Let's have park services. Let's be creative on how we can start getting back together. Because that's our, if it's church has if it's a small church has a superpower, first of all, I shouldn't say most, there's a larger percent of our disciples that are in small churches and they're in large churches. So if we think that a small church doesn't have as much impact, we're missing it. The small church it makes a massive impact in our movement. And I think we need to be the first ones to make the turn a lot of times and show that it can be done. We're at full capacity. We got full capacity within a couple months. Everybody got back, unless they had some immune sensitivities.
Right.
I mean, we were saying, hey, don't come, or if you're coughing, we didn't want people to panic or feel uncomfortable. But we really frown upon the culture, and and I don't want to offend anyone. I don't, and I'm not. This is not meant for that. But we still do. We frown upon the online culture. Like, our goal is still to get them in the chair.
Right.
So if they meet us online, that's cool, but we don't want it to stay that way. Like,
right.
You need to come in and meet us face to face, because that's where the real change happens. We want to sit at a coffee shop. We want to sit in a living room and do a Bible study. We're not studying with people online unless they're out of town or something. I mean, if they're local, we're working to get them there. So we just kind of put a stake in the ground, you know what I mean? And we said, we're going to be in person.
Right.
And we have an option that's online, but that's not our goal. So we just, so post COVID, we really concentrated on getting back to family, and I think that's something that the small church can do quicker than anybody else.
That's right.
Anyway,
let me go back to what you talked about earlier about the one thing. You talked to a friend and you said you need to focus on the one thing. You talked about just loving God, making it simple, keeping the playbook simple in the smaller church. Right. And you focused on, hey, how are your quiet times? Are you walking with God? That's all good. What would a person like? But there's a lot more that goes on in a church. I mean, if you're at 140 now, you can't be running that all by yourself. And so what's a person's takeaway? Like, I'm leading a small church. Others who are listening are leading small churches. Yep. How do you implement that? It's just saying, hey, have quiet times. I think there's 100% in agreement, like, amen to that. Love God. I don't know if there's anyone who would disagree with that. Hopefully nobody is going to disagree with that, loving God and loving your neighbor. But how would you implement it practically? Like, how would you make that a platform for your church that you can actually point to and say, hey, here's our plan, and this is why it's working?
Yeah. I think you get what you want. And if you want, and you kind of mentioned it before, if you want baptisms, then that's probably what you're going to focus on from the pulpit. That's what you're going to kind of discuss in your small group meetings. That's what you're going to do with your leadership, your small group leaders. And that's where your accountability will lie, is who came out. I mean, especially if you're a very organized guy. I'm not. But a lot of the organized guys that have a business plan, they'll say, okay, how many people do we have out the church, and how many Bible studies can we get from that? And how, we can work kind of through this system. And I think anything else that you aim at, you're going to get it. If you want a great youthful church that has got contemporary music and you're attracting the youth, if you're aiming at it and you're taking on the day and you start writing your hopes and dreams, and your good news will be about it, and your discussions will be about it, your marriage will be it will be about that. If it's about youth and family, then you know what I mean? I think anything that we want, we're going to get.
Right.
And I know that this is kind of a brain melt, and I don't mean to oversimplify this.
Right.
If we're aiming at God, those other parts fall into place. And it's a lens at which we're traveling through. It's not a category. It's a direction. Mm-hmm. So when I put Kingdom Kids underneath that lens, the question becomes, is our Kingdom Kids program glorifying God? Or is it just a bunch of organized daycare? Mm-hmm. So are our kids learning the Bible? Are they learning how to have quiet times? Wait a second. So they don't even know the books of the Bible. What it does is then it points onto the parents. Well, how are the parents doing? I mean, they're not teaching their kids. I mean, this is just a hypothetical example, but you quickly find that we're not going in the direction of God here. Um, Same thing with a marriage or a family, that seems to be in disarray. You start asking questions and you realize, well, okay, bro, like your kids are staying out how late? Like, I'm not saying you can't have your kids stay out that late, but when's the last time you said, as for me and my household, we'll serve the Lord?
Right.
It just simplifies your
Right.
choices.
Right.
And it opens up a whole door. Now, I know that you open the door and it goes to a room with a whole lot of other doors. I get it. But at the same time, as a leader, it simplifies your leadership. Yeah. Because even say worship, like a lot of times for a small church, it's okay, how are we going to have a successful worship service when we're small and we got 25 people? Sometimes you have five, quarter of the church is up
right
front, and you're like, this is awkward. Should we really have speakers, bro? Like, or should this be more like a, so we could debate about these things, but if the question gets taken off the table that this brother that's the song leader is trying to live out his conductor dreams, and the sister is just, she gets her identity from the songs that she sings, and the people in the congregation are going, well, I wouldn't sing that song. If you go, what's going to glorify God?
Right.
It'll bring a lot of the things to the surface, which really is what we need to deal with. Like, bro, you're getting your identity through the song, like through song leading.
Right.
But what are you studying?
So essentially you're saying it's a filter. It's a value system that guides all the decisions that you make daily within the church. Okay. That makes sense to me. That clarifies it. That's great. One final question, Matt. What advice would you give to the person who wants to make this life count?
Yeah. All I can tell you is what I've found. And I think what I've found, and I think it came to me probably within the last couple of years. And it almost has given me the ability now, and I know it's going to sound almost irresponsible, but take this with a grain of salt. There are many situations now that I could sit back and I can break out the popcorn and watch it. Is that I'm learning to surrender quicker and to stop fighting God to have control. And I kind of wished I'd learned that 15 years ago, that a lot of times, and maybe we talked about this in the beginning of our conversation, a lot of times I'm the problem. My problem is I'm not letting go of control. And I want to see my plan, pushed through, or I think my advice is the best advice, as opposed to how can I surrender quicker to God? And what is God trying? I mean, it's all about surrender. And that's kind of what I found. Like, everything that I'm working with is just from God. Anything good in my life is from God. So I've got to learn how to surrender that over to God so he can have control over it. My ceiling is about nose high, but God's ceiling is heavenly. Like, he could take my church to a place where I could never take it. My abilities fall way short. I mean, I got from CEO, surgeon, pharmaceutical sales guys in my church, all the way down to, teenager with their first job and everything in between. How am I going to lead all of those characters and help them to be successful and healthy? I'm not going to be able to do that. That has to be God. And I've got to learn how to get out of the way. And it's simplified. I have a lot less anxiety putting a lesson together.
Right.
I have a lot less worry. I can enjoy my family. I can go out of town and not think that everything's going to fall apart. That's small church stuff. We feel like everything is hitching on every decision that we make. And I've gotten caught up in that a lot.
That's a
take
great
risks, dream big, jump.
Yeah.
Just jump.
No, those are all good. But I like this idea of surrendering control, because I think for those who want leadership or small church leaders, there's a tendency to, I mean, you're in charge of a lot of things. You're in charge by definition. I mean, you're there, but the problem is that all the drama gets funneled straight to you, and you feel like you're the solution for everything, rather than just going, hey, listen, I'm a tool. I'm a part of the solution. I'm one tool that God can use, but not the only tool. I think that's awesome advice, and just relaxing, because that's, and that's been leading to a high attrition rate, even more high attrition rate in ministry, because there's so much pressure, and there's tons of pressure on ministers. And so that's fantastic. Matt, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the great work you're doing. Great to get to know you. And I look forward to seeing you at the Climb Small Church Leadership Conference.
Yep. We've got a few from Florida coming. So
that's awesome.
A lot of my buddies have signed up and are going to be a part of that. So that's exciting.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First of all, hit the subscribe button. Secondly, read and review one of my books, How to Plant and Grow a Church, or Courage, How to Make This Life Count. You can find them on Amazon.com. Thirdly, support the program financially by clicking the link in the show notes and selecting the general fund. Your tax-deductible gift is going to help me to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches, because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day, and make this life count.